Welcome, welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the most challenging soft skills required to navigate today's leadership complexities and tomorrow's unknowns. I am your host, Dr. Mira Brancu. What makes diversity and inclusion so hard to achieve? It might be the paradoxes, the tensions, the core dilemmas inherent in inclusive leadership that we're not attending to, the true realities of working with real people who are complicated by nature. In this episode, our guest, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, will help us identify these paradoxes and bring them to life. Welcome, Bernardo.
Thank you, Mira and Dr. Branco. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm really excited to have you on. So Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him first. He's principal of Ferdman Consulting, is an internationally recognized expert and thought leader on inclusion, diversity, and inclusive leadership, with over 39 years of experience in the US and around the world as an organization and leadership development consultant and executive coach. Bernardo is also a distinguished professor emeritus at the California School of Professional Psychology, where he taught for almost 25 years. Bernardo has written extensively on inclusion and inclusive leadership, and his most recent book is Inclusive Leadership: Transforming Diverse Lives, Workplaces, and Societies. He received his PhD in psychology from Yale University. He's a fellow of various professional organizations and was a recipient of the Society of Consulting Psychology's 2019 Award for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion Consulting. So he has a load of expertise in this area. And just to reintroduce myself, I'm your host, Dr. Mira Branco. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, founder of the Tower Scope Leadership Academy, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. Now, we are entering a new season with our new Millennials Workbook for Navigating Workplace Politics. This is coming out in December. So season 6 kicks us off by focusing on developing proactive strategies for positive, honest power and influence. And I really think that learning good inclusive leadership practices is absolutely one of those critical proactive, positive influence skills. So I love, Bernardo, that you're kicking us off this new season with this focus, because I just think it's such a good fit. So let's get started. I just want to share a little bit about your background first. I just think your background is so interesting. We have a lot of connections here. You are a Latino Jewish immigrant. Mm-hmm. And you and I had an early life growing up in Queens, New York, and I'm pretty sure in Jackson Heights, right?
I was in Forest Hills.
Forest Hills. Okay,
Jamaica,
so you're from Forest Hills and Jamaica. I'm from Jackson Heights. These are like immigrant meccas in the US, okay? Can you share more about this early upbringing, how it connects to your interests today in inclusive leadership?
Yeah, sure, very much so. I do think it's important to think about and acknowledge who we are and what our background is and be able to share it. So to me, that's a basic practice, frankly, for inclusive leadership, is to be grounded in ourselves and not to assume that everybody's like us. And that's what I learned early on. I came to the US as a 7-year-old and immediately had to learn what it was to be Latino. We didn't use that term at the time, but we were from Argentina. And a lot of people near us, at least we first lived in Manhattan for about a month, and we were in the Upper West Side in an area that had a lot of Puerto Ricans and some Dominicans, and the people around us didn't know the difference, but we thought we were different, just based on our middle-class Argentinian perspective. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but we didn't see ourselves as similar or even close to being similar to the Puerto Ricans, and yet we were in some ways, according to the people that looked at us. So that was a very first lesson in how perceptions of people make a difference in the relationships between different groups, right? We are not just who we think we are individually, but we're members of these different groups, and we see ourselves, but are also seen that way. So also as a Jew, coming from Argentina, we were in the minority there, but then we were suddenly in the minority of the Jewish community in New York. When we moved to Queens, I started going to Hebrew school, and these people around me were kind of different and strange. I was learning English at school and had to fit in. People asked me to, I had to learn things like how to play stickball or baseball. And, the kids and the counselors at the summer day camp showed me how to bat, and they showed me how to bat right-handed, which I still do if I ever bat, which I don't do very often, but I'm left-handed. They never
Mm.
stopped to pay attention to what my particular needs were. And then this was in 1966. And I remember still around then, the next year and so on, is a time of a lot of immigration after the 1965 immigration law, which later I became aware of how our experience was related to that of many other people. And so that's the other thing I learned as I reflected back on my past and my experiences, how they are related to something that's going on around that we don't always know about, right? People's experiences now as immigrants may be different than those of people around then or at different times. So what I remember is at my school noticing a lot of the kids coming from Spanish-speaking countries who didn't know English very well, acting out, being aggressive, and trying to think in my young mind, 8, 9 years old, 7, 8, 9, what's going on with them? Having some empathy, not liking the bullying and the aggressiveness, but also thinking there's something going on around them. So that was kind of my early ventures in social psychology before I even knew
Yeah.
what that was,
Yeah.
trying to understand how systems affect us.
Absolutely. I 100% relate. I came when I was 6. We came under a refugee sponsorship status, and also sponsored by a Jewish organization, HIAS, which
Mm.
still is around today, to help political refugees and Jewish refugees. And um, I remember having some similar experiences. I remember being put in a special education classroom because they didn't really like separate you out just because you didn't know English. Everybody who didn't understand, regardless of reason, went into the special education classroom, right? And so we had different needs, obviously, but that was kind of like an interesting experience. And I remember just um, looking back how much it planted the seeds for my own interests in clinical and social psychology and how systems work and how some people succeed and some people don't within a system due to cultural barriers, due to not just language, but like understanding how to navigate within a system with lots of unspoken rules. And that's kind of how I ended up being interested in workplace politics and sort of these social aspects of how we learn and grow and succeed in organizations as well. So I think we have a lot of interesting things in common in that way. Now I'm curious
Absolutely.
if we fast forward to kind of where you are today, um, and you've gotten into inclusive leadership. How did you end up being interested in, especially like applying these interests to organizations and specifically to leaders navigating organizations? What were some of the challenges that you've seen as you've worked with leaders and organizations that cause you to grow this interest in inclusive leadership?
I think throughout my career, in my studies, and as I became a professor and a consultant, I think what I was always interested in was how can we make a difference? How can we help and work with people to work better across differences? How can we bridge those different experiences, cultural perspectives, identities in a way that honors the specific identities and also sees ourselves as we're both similar and different, I guess, is how the way I would put it, is that um, groups are different from each other and we're also very different individually. And so those two things connect, right? And during my graduate education, I studied, I was in the psychology department at Yale, but I also took classes at the School of Organization and Management. That was very influential for me. And I learned about group dynamics and organizational diagnosis and paradox in particular as we think about group interactions and dynamics. And so that lens of trying to see the opposites that are contained in any particular phenomenon as an inherent part of that phenomenon was very influential for me. So I started thinking about everything that way. So later on, I'm not going to tell you all the details, but a little bit later, when I was thinking about, there were a lot of controversies about affirmative action, for example, and I was thinking about fairness and equity. How do we think about equity differently, depending if we take an individual lens or a group lens? I realized that they both matter, right? I want to be treated as an individual, but I also don't want my identity as a Latino, as a Jew, as a man, as a whatever I am to be acknowledged. And there's differences between the different groups, but I'm also different than other Jews and other Latinos and other men. So there's a combination of within group diversity and between group diversity that both matter. And this was something I addressed in trying to understand fairness from a paradoxical perspective. We want both to individual perspectives. We want everybody to be treated as individual. And we also want to understand what are the pattern ways in which groups are treated differently, often unequally, when it comes to things like race and gender and ability and many other dimensions of difference. And so taking a paradoxical perspective helps us understand that we need both lenses. And I did the same thing in my research on intercultural interactions, starting with my dissertation, really trying to understand how we can take into account things like cultural difference and group identities, but also recognize that there's within group individualization that matters. And so this is, in a sense, the seeds of what I've been doing since then, to look at
Yeah.
inclusion really as an interactive process. And we can
I'm
talk more about
especially
it.
interested in, yeah, I'm especially interested in if we go back to like the basics in psychology
Mhm.
first, before we get into the sort of inclusive leadership perspective around paradox. What are the uh, sort of basic foundational things to think about when you think about paradoxes within group dynamics? Like
Mm.
how
Well,
can people understand that from just a psychological standpoint when they're looking at groups? What are those paradoxes that we think about?
okay. I'll illustrate at least, I'll describe at least one of them. And this comes
Yeah.
in part from my professor, David Berg, and his colleague, Ken Smith, who wrote a wonderful book called Paradoxes of Group Life back in the 1980, late 80s. Anyway, one key paradox that it's important to understand is that when we belong to a group, when we join a group, right, when we're partnering with other people, on the one hand, we want to give up of ourselves, our separateness, our identity as separate, right? We have to be kind of as one with the group to really feel like we're part of it, to really engage, right? But the other side of that is if we do that, if we give up who we are, then we're not contributing so much to the group. We're not making as much of a difference. To be useful to the group, to be able to truly contribute something, I have to maintain my distinctiveness, that unique part that really adds some difference. Otherwise, what's the point of having me there if I'm just a clone of the other people, right? And so, but it's a both andness. If I'm totally
Mhm.
different and I don't feel like I'm really part of it, then I'm not contributing either. So I have to keep both there, right?
That's really good. Yeah,
And
super,
so
super
that's one
helpful.
example. You know, I'm attracted to people like me, but if I'm only with people like me, then we're not going to get the benefit of the fact that we're all different. And the reality is anybody might be like me, but they're also different from me. It's
Yeah,
always
yeah,
both, right? And
that's
there's a psychologist who influenced me a lot in some of his work. His name is Gurevich, but he wrote about the importance of not understanding, right? When we're trying to understand someone, we can try so hard to understand that we're not able to not understand, and the importance, even with someone we're so close to make them strange, not in a negative way, but in the sense of not finishing each other's sentences. If I'm with my wife and I just assume I know exactly what she's going to say or do, I actually can create some problems in our relationship, right? Intimacy has its limits to the extent that I impose myself on others through my own lens. And so this is a basic thing also. You asked about, basic things in psychology. Is that sense of similarity and otherness is always part of human relations. And that, you asked me about my background. That always fascinated me, because as an immigrant, as someone who moved later from New York to Puerto Rico, had to readapt again, and then from Puerto Rico to college, from this elite, university that I'd never stepped foot on, very strange and alien in some ways, and familiar in terms of some of the academics and things. So there's always that both andness that I
hmm
think is part of inclusion and inclusive leadership, right?
yeah, awesome, awesome. Thank you. This is great. So as we're thinking about how to be part of a group but maintain distinctiveness and contribute without making assumptions, those paradoxes. When we come back from the ad break, by the way, we're reaching an ad break here. When we come back, let's now start applying this to what that looks like and what those paradoxes are related to inclusive leadership. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest today, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman. And we air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. At that time, you can find us live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, several other locations at talkradio.nyc. And we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Branco, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
If you don't have your health, what do you really have? It's time to feel good in your body and shift from struggle to ease. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tripp, your host of Nourish the Soul, where we explore the sacred wisdom of your body while you sit back, relax, and go on a journey of self-discovery. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to awaken your heart, transform your well-being, and unlock a deeper understanding of yourself.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest today, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman. And we're talking about inclusive leadership. We just got done talking about the paradoxes inherent in group processes. And now we're going to start applying it to inclusive leadership. So let's start with just like, what is the definition, your definition of inclusive leadership?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that leadership can come from anyone. So that's why I talk about it as inclusive leadership rather than inclusive leaders.
Oh,
It's not a
yes.
trait, but it's really about what we do or don't do. And so inclusive leadership is about helping to foster more what I call experiences of inclusion for everyone across all our many different identities, supporting ourselves and others feeling more valued, safe, engaged, able to be ourselves, able to speak up, able to participate and contribute in ways that are supportive of who we are across many different identities. So more experiences of inclusion, fostering those. Second of all, treating, helping to see and treat diversity as a collective advantage, something that's of mutual benefit for the person and for everyone, right? Collectives, groups, organizations, communities, where we really see our differences as a resource that is beneficial for everyone. Third, it's about really trying to foster ideas, direction, contributions from many different kinds of people across many different identities, right? Not assuming that people in a position of authority only fit a certain mold, can only be of certain identities, but expanding that idea, expanding who we listen to for innovation and contributions, and helping to make that happen. And the fourth part for me is really focusing on equity and social justice as important goals and things that we address. So all those four things, experiences of inclusion, diversity as an advantage, contributions and direction from all kinds of people, and equity and social justice, I think are all critical to inclusive leadership.
Thank you. This is a really, really helpful definition and set of portions of that definition. And before we get into the paradoxes, as I'm listening to these four, I'm compelled to think about the article that you wrote in 2017, which is so apropos today. It's called "In Trump's Shadow: Questioning and Testing the Boundaries of Inclusion."
Yeah.
And you identify the challenge of these paradoxes and tensions about how we think through like how we show up as DEI consultants and champions and inclusive leaders, how to better engage with people who are, different from us, and not sort of impose our ideas necessarily, but sort of like navigate how we feel about people with different points of view, right? And now we've entered this new Trump presidency. We feel like some voices are more emboldened that those voices might challenge how we think about accepting inclusion or embracing or whatever. And there's this intense tension there that I feel, that I think like many of us feel. And I look back at the definitions that you shared, right? And especially the fostering ideas, contributions from different perspectives, the equity and social justice piece.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, as you've been thinking through how to just be able to lean into differences of opinion, even when we feel that they're
Mhm.
so off and so hurtful to other people and to us, but still the importance of engaging and the
Mhm.
importance of having different, differences of ideas. How do you make sense of it, Bernardo? What
Yeah.
should we do?
It's confusing and difficult, and I hear that in
Yeah.
part in the challenge of even the questions, right? This is a
Yeah.
challenging time for some of us in this space of working on inclusion. My career, my values are all about trying to create a more inclusive and more just world where more of us can be ourselves and do things that matter. And I have to admit that that's challenged by some of the politics and perspectives of the incoming, what I think are the perspectives and politics of the incoming administration, at least as stated often during these last few years. And so the challenge that I see for myself, and as written about in that article as well, as a D&I consultant, is I want to have inclusion. I want to have more voices, more perspectives, more identities. So how do I reconcile that with you know, a lot of people who are saying, wait, we're trying to close things down. We want to put a border and make it stronger. We want to think that only certain kinds of people should be included and not others. That there's some limits to our acceptance. There's a lot of debate over transgender identities, and I think I find that difficult, but it also makes sense that we're all always debating who should be included and to what, right? What is that nation or collective and who decides who's being included? How are the boundaries determined, right? There's always has to be boundaries. And so the challenge is who decides them and how. And so my challenge is, how do I listen to someone who has a different point of view than mine in a way that is open and inclusive and tries to understand or not understand, as I explained earlier, at least to allow for that. But also, how do I at the same time stand strong for the values of doing that? Because if the message from the other person or the other group is, no, we want to shut things down, to me, that's a kind of polarization. If it's a total shutdown, if it says, no, you are not included under any circumstances, that's total exclusion. Well, that's ethnocentrism, or it could be imperialism. I mean, it depends how you think about it. But then now we have a values conflict that we have to resolve. But we have to be in dialogue anyway, whether or not we disagree. But I also take from when I start thinking about inclusion, I think there's three different types. One is just pure assimilation. You can only be included to the extent that you become like us and you adopt our values, right? So that makes it clear who's in the dominant group, who is the us and who is the them, right? And a lot of the rhetoric I hear is like that. And that's the part that I'm challenged by. Another kind of inclusion is one that says anything goes, right? And that's what some people seem to be upset about, and why they are, um, um, why we see what we're seeing now. Some people are saying, well, it was too open, right? We hear this fear of unbounded borders, and that's challenging to a lot of people, because it feels like it's going to challenge our sense of identity or stability or anything like that. Again, apart from the the bigotry that might be related to that, but just in general, right? I don't want anybody living in my house. I want to have a space in my house that's mine, right? And that seems to be reasonable, right? Even as I try to take care of other people outside my house or in the neighborhood. So those two kinds, neither of those is truly inclusion in my mind. What inclusion is having some norms around how we interact with each other in ways that make space for more people and more possibilities, in ways that include some degree of civility. So we have to understand what those norms and rules are. And the philosopher Karl Popper, in writing about tolerance, said that if we want to really promote tolerance, we have to be intolerant of the intolerant. That's a kind of a paradox, right? It's like if you're truly tolerant, you're not going to tolerate intolerance, which is
Right.
right. It seems contradictory, but it's really not. As long as, so I think that's the tension that I'm dealing with. And so I need to be able to engage and understand how are different people around me and around the country thinking and feeling. Why do they feel that way? If I just lord it over people and think that only my position is correct, that's not inclusion or diversity or equity. It doesn't align with my values. So I have to make sure that my approach, so that's my approach to inclusion. It's about trying to listen. It's about trying to dialogue. It's about trying to engage, even when something is uncomfortable and challenging and difficult, right? I don't think it works when you go to someone and say, you are absolutely wrong. There's something wrong with you. You have to come over to my way. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes when we try to promote progressive values, that's what sometimes happens, or people experience it that way anyway, right? And so there's a balance to be struck that says, no, I'm not going to give up on the need to have rights for more people and inclusion of more people. I think people who are neurodivergent or people who LGBTQ plus, people who have a disability should deserve to be fully part of a group, society, workplace. The biggest civil rights law in the United States was the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that benefits so many of us, right? So we have to really address that, and everybody matters in this regard, right? In other words, even people who want to put up boundaries and borders and all of that also can benefit from this approach to inclusion. And so part of it is, how do we engage with people in a dialogue where instead of attacking people, how do we start hearing each other and getting that feeling of being more open and engaged? So then it starts changing the image of what this is all about and makes more space eventually for more difference, right?
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you, there's a couple of things that are resonating about how to reconcile some of this, which is, you mentioned one of the 4 parts of inclusive leadership includes, feeling valued and valuing others, engaged, able to speak up and feel safe, and offering that to others, right? And we each have the power to do that regardless of what role we're in. And we expect and hope that of others. And so the sort of like flip to that is making assumptions and quick judgments and being judgmental, which shuts people down and doesn't make them feel valued and doesn't make them feel, heard and supported. And so how can we sort of overcome our judgmental assumption side, which serves a purpose? It keeps us safe in certain situations, and then doesn't serve a purpose when it comes to connection and engagement and learning or opening, up, viewpoints and things like that. So that's kind of like how I'm starting to reconcile some of these paradoxes. We are reaching an ad break, and now we're definitely going to pull all of this together with the paradoxes. I absolutely love, I have one of your articles up that shows these paradoxes, and I think they're just immensely helpful. So we're going to dive in when we come back from the ad break around these so that we can learn a little bit more. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Branco, and our guest, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman of Inclusive Leadership, expert and book. And we talked a lot about various paradoxes as well as what inclusive leadership means, which is a big part of this, how to define it, explain it, understand it in more complex terms than perhaps people are used to in order to acknowledge the complexity behind what we're trying to really balance here. And one of the things that I read, you're very prolific, Bernardo, and you write a lot about this. And one of the articles that I really love was from 2017 in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science, The Paradoxes of Inclusion, Understanding and Managing the Tensions of Diversity and Multiculturalism. And there is this this framework that or figure that you shared about 3 different types of paradoxes that I would love for you to share a little bit more about. Like, what are those 3 different types of paradoxes? What are the things that we're trying to balance?
Sure. Just to remember the context, right? This is premised on the idea that diversity is a resource of benefit. And if you think about the United States, for example, the motto "Et pluribus unum," from many one. So on the one hand, there's this idea that we can blend together, but on the other hand, the structures, the processes, the rules, if you will, maintain that distinctiveness. For example, of the different states, the many are not blended completely into just this homogeneous mass. There's a certain pride in the many differences, right? There's debate now about the extent of the differences that should be allowed. And that feeds into the examples of the paradoxes. So there's 3 different paradoxes that I discuss and analyze in this article that you mentioned and in my thinking about this. I'll now explain very briefly, I'll mention the 3 and then I can go into each one. But one of them has to do with the paradox of what I call the self-expression and identity. So who am I? How much in what ways can I express that in a group context? And how can we be both alike and different in a group, as building on what I was talking about earlier? How do we foster belonging and unity so we can have inclusion in a diverse group and enable the differences to coexist so we can add value to and inform the whole group, right? So that's one of the paradoxes. The second one has to do with boundaries and norms. What is it that holds us together? What is the container in which we coexist? And who defines that and what defines that? And how flexible and rigid are our norms and that bond that holds us together, especially as people change or as the membership changes? or to what degree should it change or can it change? And the third one has to do with safety and comfort. It's a paradox of safety and comfort. How much freedom of action, what range of expression do we each have as we engage across our differences? What demands can we make of each other? What responsibilities do we have toward each other? How can we be safe as we interact, uncomfortable, perhaps, in addition to being safe? So if you'd like, I can go through each one.
Yes, yes. So we're looking at 3: paradox of self-expression and identity, then boundaries and norms, and safety and comfort. Let's start with the self-expression and identity. What are we struggling with here?
Yeah. So just to remind you and the listeners, paradoxes are dynamics phenomena where the opposite, it feels like there's opposites but it's part of the two sides of the same coin. So if you think of yin and yang, right? The idea is that all of us have both of them, even though they contradictory to each other. And part of what happens in paradoxes is if we pull towards one direction, the other one kind of pops up and gets stronger too. So in groups and societies, you feel a certain pulling in one direction. To the extent that it's a paradoxical dynamic, the other side is going to reemerge even stronger, right? So in this a paradox of self-expression and identity, on the one side of the paradox, inclusion means we can all belong and be the same, right? That's the belonging side, right? We're equally citizens of the United States, regardless of if we're immigrants or not, or how many generations in this country. I'm a member of XYZ Corporation. We're all exemplars of XYZ Corporation, right? Men, women, new people, more veterans, everyone has that same right of membership and being an exemplar, right? So from that perspective, we encourage people to be more like each other, and we emphasize similarities, right? I remember Vice President Harris speaking to that in almost every speech. We're more alike than we are different, right? As a way to emphasize this. And it makes sense for many of us, right? The other side of the paradox is that inclusion means we can all belong and be different. That it's okay for me to come to the United States and speak Spanish as a first language as well as English, right? That I don't have to lose that distinctiveness. On the contrary, that inclusion means I can maintain it. That it's possible when we're free to be different from each other as we're in this collective. Inclusion means allowing and fostering authenticity, even dissent. The dissent can be seen as helping all of us. And inclusion would encourage, from this perspective, people to follow their own path and emphasize how people are different, not in a way that makes us conflict with each other, but rather that says that's just natural, right? Why would I want all my kids to be the same? I have 3 kids. They're all different from each other. And so to really be fully part of the family, that each should be able to follow their own path. And I mean, most people would.
One of the insights I think I'm having right now as you're describing this is, and I'm stuck on this idea of like, the more you insist on one side, the more the other side is going to pop up, right? So, one of the things that I think we've noticed is the more we want to insist on differences, the more people who want to feel a sense of connection start getting agitated by, why are we talking about our differences, and that is like a reaction to the insistence of differences. And so can we both appreciate our differences and also have some shared values that bring us together is one way to potentially reconcile that paradox, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the values piece is also related to the boundaries and norms, right? What are the bases for being together? But just at a basic level, if you think about the different poles that you mentioned, right? You might hear someone say or think, if I just learn their rules for success, then I'll be fully accepted, right? So you remember back in was it the 80s or whatever it was, when there was these books to tell women how to dress for success, and they would wear those little floppy things that look like ties, and it just didn't work very well, right? Yeah. That was the trend. How do you assimilate, actually? That's the idea, right? And many people try to do that. I learned English, and when I moved from New York to Puerto Rico, I lost my Queens or Long Island accent, right? And I learned a new kind of Spanish, right? Because that's what helped me fit in. But what I learned over time is that didn't bring out the best in me. That if I could really wanted to be grounded in who I am and truly feel a part, I should be able to also be different, right? So the other side is the other expression that you hear is, if I want to be fully authentic to who I am, I'm not ever going to do things their way, right? I'm going to sell out, right? So we see these two sides of the paradox. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yes, yes. So those of you who are able to watch us either live stream or later on YouTube when we post this on video, I'm sharing the page on the article where you could actually see all of these paradoxes, what they look like, the definitions. So let's go to the next one. Paradox of boundaries and norms. Tell us about this one.
Yeah. And later, I hope we can come and talk about how do you address them, because it's really, by the way, let me just say that it's about holding space for the paradox. If you try to just do it one side or the other, it's not going to work. And so just the basic idea is we have to find a way to make it a both and always, right? And that's a key part of leadership anyways, managing paradox and understanding and managing it. Anyway, the second paradox is about boundaries and norms, and it has to do with, what holds us together. How do we effectively define collective boundaries and norms without losing the benefits of expansion, of challenge, of pressure that helps make the norms more adaptive to changing membership and to changing conditions? If we just do everything the same way always, how are we going to deal with the changing world and the changing membership, right? Even if you keep the same people in a group, we change, we get older, we develop, we have different needs over time. So we have to constantly re-examine our processes, but not to just do only that. So that's the tension, right? We have to pay attention to and address people's needs and views and still do work. So on the one hand, inclusion is about having stable and well-defined norms, especially and boundaries, especially around inclusion, right? So how do we have to deal with each other? Who can come in and out? How should we interact? We need to make those fairly clear and well-defined. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit chaotic. We have a safe container for people. Otherwise, how do you have inclusion? We need to know what is that defined container. And then we should have norms of inclusion that should be consistent and passed on. Otherwise, how do we maintain inclusion? The other side of that is we have to shift and be open about our norms and boundaries over time, because if we don't, we have to reconstruct them and re-examine as current members and conditions change. We have to have a permeable, flexible container. If we're just a hard, rigid boundary, then we're not really fostering inclusion. And then the norms of inclusion should change as the members and needs change, right? What was felt inclusive in these conditions is going to change as so you have to do both, right? That's the idea, right? So,
and, I'm personally reflecting on when I do team development and I notice that a team is having trouble with the very first thing that we do, which is ground rules.
Yes.
Then I know this is a troubled team, because and now I'm connecting it to this boundaries and norms, because there isn't enough of finding balance somewhere with the norms that they have and the flexibility. And they just get stuck there. And that's usually a sign to me that they've got a lot of work to do.
That's right. Yeah. But that process is so important. That's a key, at least with the people who are there. The other side of that is the fear of the slippery slope. It's like, if we change this, like if we change the rules or open the conversation, we may just well give it all up, right? But on the other hand, if you don't do that, then nothing happens, right? We might, right? So if we say we need to get everyone's input and consent before we act, or we might offend someone, that's the other side of it. So then you're in an endless process, right? And then you don't get any work done. So you have to find some balance that allows for both edges. It's not just the middle ground. That's the mistake also, is just thinking that there's a middle ground. There isn't a middle ground. That's what's really confusing and hard about this.
Yeah, brilliant. There isn't, it's based on, the team and what the team needs with the composition they have, and redoing those norms when it makes sense. There's, if there's a shift. Okay, we're reaching an ad break. So when we come back, we'll get into that last paradox of safety and comfort. Thank you very much, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, for joining us. We'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mara Branco, and our guest today, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman, author and expert of inclusive leadership. Bernardo, we talked about two of your three paradoxes. I'd love to get into that last one, safety and comfort. What's the paradox that we are going back and forth between with that one?
Yeah, that's a really important one. And here, on the one hand, inclusion is about creating more comfort, right? It's about increasing my individual comfort. It's about increasing collective comfort. We should feel at ease, right? We shouldn't be looking behind our back to see if somebody's going to get us all the time, right? We need to be able to be okay with difference, right? We want to be able to be authentic and allow other people to be that way and accept them for who they are, so they can be comfortable as themselves. So people should be able to just be, right? But my father used to say to me and my brothers that our comfort in stretching out ends at the other person's nose. Right? So that's the other side of the paradox, is that we have to be able to leave our individual and comfort zone and expand our options and responses as part of fostering inclusion. Because the more that we make space for difference, the more I'm going to run into people who might be unusual, different, that I don't understand, that I need to be able to adjust to, or at least that there needs to be mutual adjustment. So inclusion is only going to be possible if everybody's more attentive and sensitive and less focused on feeling at ease, right? So we all have to adapt and support each other, and everybody has to change to some degree to co-construct inclusion. And so it's about mutual discomfort, right? We have to do it to the degree that we can stand. We all have to become more comfortable with that kind of discomfort. And so part of it is that the discomfort has to be more equitable, because some people are just used to going around without thinking about it and just being themselves. And other people constantly have to adapt, like you and I as immigrants had to do that, right? The other people around us just did their thing. They weren't adapting to us so much as we had to adapt to them. And so this is a tension that we have to constantly think about, because you can't just have it one way or the other way, or it's not going to hold. And so that's really the third paradox.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so identity and self-expression, boundaries and norms, and safety and comfort.
Exactly.
What can leaders do with this information to navigate the tensions that they see and create that experience of inclusion in the workplace in a way that balances these? What does it look like in practice?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there's some ways you have to manage the paradox. I think in terms of self-expression identity, we have to avoid polarizing between the two sides. We have to understand that identifying with the larger group can allow for distinctiveness. I can be an
Mm.
American of a certain type. I could be a
Mhm.
member of an organization who is different than others. For example, you and I are both part of the American Psychological Association. There's how many 50 plus divisions, right? Different
Yeah.
kinds of psychologists. It doesn't make us any less of psychologists. So I can be Jewish and Latino, and people say, really, a Jewish Latino? I understand I'm not prototypical, but I can still be 100% Latino, even though I'm different than many, many other Latinos. And same
Mhm.
thing as a Jew, I'm different than other Jews in the United States. So it's that both andness, right? And also affirmation of uniqueness can strengthen a sense of authentic belonging to the collective. So by strengthening those sub-identities, there's actually research that shows that we have a stronger connection to the larger
Interesting.
group. So that strengthens the whole. So we're all joined together in our difference and uniqueness. So we're all similar because we're different, right? So that's kind of part of one way to do it. So we have to construct these these more complex views of collective identity, more multifaceted. Um, for the second paradox around boundaries and norms, we have to recognize the paradox. We have to note our own internal ambivalence about boundaries and norms, right? I want some norms. I want you to follow norms, but I don't want to be so constrained. Well, there's a paradox here that I have to own. And so how do I acknowledge that multiple feeling, that ambivalence? So we have to engage across differences in spirit of learning and possibility. We have to expect to engage across different approaches for engaging across differences. And so we have to so part of it is what you described, which is in a group or in a collective to together create the norms rather than assuming that my movie of how we're going to be together is yours. I don't know that. I have to come together and say, hey, how are we doing this? How do you like to do this? How do I like to do it? Right? Now, power obviously plays a role, right? And so authority, power, we have to understand how we manage that. We have to create and use rules for dissent and rule breaking, which is kind of paradoxical, right? Do we have a space for people to truly dissent, and to break the rules, right? And so part of it is also, I think, creating a collective definition of the boundary that's based on shared values and also holding space for divergent values. And then the other part, I mentioned the slippery slope. We have to work with who's there and then also make space for newcomers and their possible dissent or discomfort, right? So how do we both say, okay, here's who we are. Like right now, we're not using closed captions, but somebody might be listening to this and then they have a machine that helps to create it, right? If I was deaf, right, maybe we would need to be talking in sign language, right? So, but we're not doing that. So, but I'm recognizing that might be a need under certain circumstances. And for comfort and discomfort, we have to understand that comfort always has limits, and self-expression, self-determination have to happen in a context of mutual understanding and collaboration. I can't just run over you. And so it's about sensitivity to each other and to each other's needs and styles. And so that means engaging in ongoing dialogue and learning. So if I'm a leader and I have something that bothers me, how do I go towards that thing that is frustrating and challenging and try to engage with it in dialogue while also keeping some norms and rules, right? So, or at least the goals of trying to, what we're trying to do together, and then being in that uncomfortable space of growing and learning together. So again, I mentioned dissent, promoting and accepting dissent in the context of improving and perfecting the society, the system, the group, right? I'm not asking for dissent to undermine it and ruin it. I'm asking it because it's about lifting all of us up. And ultimately, it's about learning to be uncomfortable, to be comfortable with the discomfort of growth. When I go to the gym, my muscles ache a little bit, and that's a sign that we're growing, right? So that's a metaphor for the kind of discomfort I'm talking about. And people who we don't understand are important in our collective work. So I don't know if that's a solution completely, but it's a way to hold the paradox and to learn as we go.
Yeah. And I think my takeaway from all of this is just to be much more aware of what assumptions that I'm making that are really not not questioned, but they're my assumptions about what somebody wants or needs of me, or how to lean into a discussion, or that kind of thing. It reminds me also of one of the items on an assessment that I use is we spend the right amount of time on discussions. And
Mhm.
I've never had a team agree on what the right amount of time is, because some people want more and some people want less. But when you make an assumption of what the right amount of anything is, that's when you get caught up in not really attending to what is needed. So that's a little teeny piece of many things that I've taken away from today. Bernardo, what is one quick thing before we close out that you want people to take away from today?
I think develop one's self-awareness, be humble about one's assumptions, and ask lots of questions. I think my Facebook motto or whatever it's called is embrace paradox and ask lots of questions. I think we need to be curious and increase our awareness, and also be willing to learn and be influenced by others.
Beautiful.
So I think it's an
Yeah.
ongoing challenge, but I think being grounded in this idea that we're just one piece of the puzzle, that the world, our organizations we're all building a puzzle together, right? And everybody brings their own puzzle piece. And part of inclusive leadership is creating that environment and space where everyone can add their puzzle piece, and not confusing our own puzzle piece with the whole puzzle.
Beautiful analogy. I love that. If people want to work with you, where should they find you? Where can they go?
Well, my website is ferdmanconsulting.com. My last name, consulting.com, ferdmanconsulting.com. That's probably the simplest way. I'm also on LinkedIn, easily found. And I think those are the two ways to reach me. I'd love to connect with people in your audience who are interested in some of my work. And I also do this diversity and inclusion work in terms of, at this level, helping people learn how to be more inclusive in their behavior and bring inclusion to life, and also leadership coaching for individuals and groups. And so glad to connect.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Audience, what did you take away? Importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Bernardo? Share it with us on LinkedIn and on at talkradio.nyc, at Mira Brancu, at Bernardo Ferdman, so that we could cheer you on. And talkradio.nyc is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon podcasts, all over the place. Help us increase our visibility and reach and impact by leaving a review, by listening to this episode later and sharing with other people that you think might benefit. And thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, your host of the Hard Skills Show. And thank you today for joining us, Dr. Bernardo Ferdman. Really appreciate all your insights. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you're tuning in from, everybody. Bye.